In the winter of 1886, every expert in Alaska agreed on one rule of survival: never let your floor touch the ground. They called it gospel. But by February, that same rule had turned their homes into frozen coffins, leaving only one man warm, the immigrant who dared to dig his own grave. Every trapper in the Alaska Territory repeated it like gospel: never let your floor touch the earth. Raise it on stone piers or die from the cold seeping up. In 1886, a Norwegian immigrant named Lars Bergen listened to this advice from a dozen men who'd survived 20 winters on the frontier. Then he ignored every word of it. While his neighbors built their cabins 2 feet above the frozen ground, Lars dug 4 foot down into it. "The man's building his own grave," one old-timer muttered. What happened next exposed a lie that had been killing settlers for generations. Lars Bergen arrived in Alaska Territory in the summer of 1884, part of a steady stream of Scandinavian immigrants drawn by advertisements promising cheap land and endless opportunity. He'd left behind a small village in the Lofoten Islands where his family had survived brutal Arctic winters for generations, not by fighting the cold, but by working with the earth itself. Norwegian homes in the far north were built partially into hillsides. Their back walls pressed against earth that stayed stable year-round. Root cellars kept fish and vegetables from freezing, not through insulation from above, but through contact with ground that never dropped below 45 degrees. Regardless of what the wind did at the surface, the earth 4 foot down didn't care if the air above was minus 30 degrees. It held its temperature like a stubborn old man who refused to change his mind. America taught him different lessons, or tried to. His first winter was spent in a boarding house in Juneau, surrounded by trappers and miners and frontier veterans who'd survived decades in these mountains. They spoke with absolute certainty about what worked and what didn't. "Cabin floor has to be raised," a grizzled trapper named Miller explained one evening, tobacco smoke curling around his weathered face. 2 feet minimum on stone piers. You let that floor touch the ground, the cold seeps up through the earth and freezes you from below. I've seen men die that way. Feet turned black while they slept. Every man in the room nodded. The raised floor was settled wisdom passed down from the first mountain men who'd built shelters in these valleys 50 years before. Stone piers or log cribbing beneath every cabin created an air gap between the floor and frozen ground. The gap was protection. The gap was survival. No one questioned it. Lars listened, but something troubled him. In Norway, earth contact meant warmth, not cold. His grandfather's home had stone floors laid directly on packed earth, and those floors never froze, even when January storms buried the village for weeks. How could the same planet that kept Norwegian settlers above freezing somehow drain heat from Alaskan cabins? He asked Miller about it one evening. The trapper laughed and poured another whiskey. "Norwegian earth ain't Alaskan earth, son. Coal here goes different. Freezes deeper. What works over there don't work here." Miller leaned closer, whiskey on his breath. "I've been in these mountains since '62. Seen 100 greenhorns come through with ideas from the old country. Most of them are dead now. The ones who lived, they learned to do things the American way." Lars let the matter drop. But he didn't forget. Through the winter of 1884 to 1885, he watched and measured and thought. He visited cabins throughout the territory, feeling floors with his hands, noting which ones turned to ice and which stayed merely cold. He observed something the old-timers had never considered. The coldest floors weren't the ones touching earth. They were the ones raised above it. A cabin floor on stone piers sat above an air gap that dropped outside temperature, minus 20, minus 30, minus 40. That gap became a reservoir of cold pressing upward against thin wooden planks. The floor wasn't protected from cold. It was surrounded by it on both sides. By spring of 1886, Lars had saved enough to buy 20 acres of land in a valley near the Yukon. Good grass, decent timber, and soil that would dig easily. He was going to build a cabin that violated everything the old-timers held sacred. He was going to dig down instead of building up. The excavation began in July 1886. While the ground was soft and workable, Lars marked out a rectangle 20-foot x 16 feet, modest by American standards, but generous by Norwegian ones, and started digging 4 foot down. Not a root cellar beneath the cabin, but the cabin floor itself sunk into the earth. His nearest neighbor, a cattle rancher named Silas Thorne, who'd homesteaded the adjacent valley in 1879, rode over on the third day of digging. Silas had survived 7 winters and buried 2 hired hands who hadn't. He considered himself an authority on what killed men in this country. "Bergen, what in God's name are you doing?" Lars leaned on his shovel, sweat soaking through his wool shirt. "Digging my floor." "Digging your floor?" Silas repeated the words slowly as if testing them for sanity. "You're putting your floor in a hole 4 foot down below the frost line." Silas's weathered face twisted with genuine concern. "Son, I've seen men do foolish things out here. Build cabins in avalanche chutes. Set up camp in dry creek beds. But I've never seen anyone dig his own floor into the frozen ground." He pointed at the excavation. "That earth freezes solid by December. You're going to be living in an ice box." "The earth 4 foot down doesn't freeze," Lars replied. "It stays near 50 degrees year-round." Silas shook his head. "That's Norwegian talk. This is Alaska. The earth doesn't know the difference." Silas gathered his reins. "Miller told me about you. Said you ask questions like a man who thinks he knows better than everyone who came before." He turned his horse. "Build your grave if you want, but don't expect me to dig you out come spring." Word spread through the valley within days. The crazy Norwegian was building a dugout, not a proper cabin, but a hole in the ground like an animal. The old-timers gathered at the Mercantile to discuss this fresh evidence of immigrant foolishness. Miller himself weighed in. "I warned him last winter, told him the raised floor was the only thing between a man and freezing." He nodded like he understood, and now he's digging a pit. The trapper spat tobacco juice. "Some men can't be taught. They have to learn by dying." A betting pool formed. $3 said Lars would abandon the project before snowfall. $5 said he'd make it to December before fleeing. $7, contributed by Silas himself, said Lars Bergen would be found frozen in his sunken cabin by February. The women organized their own response. Mrs. Thorne led a delegation in early August, finding Lars chest deep in his excavation. "Mr. Bergen, we're concerned about your welfare," she announced from horseback. "The men say you'll freeze." Lars climbed out of the pit, dirt clinging to his clothes. "In Norway, we call this a jordjeller, an earth house. My great-grandfather built one. It still stands." "This isn't Norway, Mr. Bergen." "No, but the earth is the same. The ground will keep me warm while your husbands burn through there with piles." Mrs. Thorne's sympathy hardened. "Pride goes before destruction, Mr. Bergen." The excavation took 3 weeks. Lars hauled over 400 cubic feet of earth out of the pit, piling it in berms around the perimeter for wind protection. By early August, he stood at the bottom of a rectangle 4 feet below grade, the walls shored with rough-cut timber. The floor came first. Not wooden planks, but flat stones hauled from a creek bed 2 miles distant. He laid them tight in a bed of sand. Stone conducted heat slowly, and the earth beneath it held a constant temperature that no winter could touch. He drove a metal rod 5 feet into the ground and left it overnight. The next morning, the tip was cool, but nowhere near freezing. It was 52 degrees. The walls rose from the pit's edge, honed logs notched at the corners. But unlike his neighbors' cabins, Lars's walls only needed to rise 4 feet above ground level to achieve full ceiling height. Less wall meant less surface area bleeding heat into the winter air. The roof was sawed over split logs, heavy, but providing insulation no wooden shingles could match. By September, the exterior looked like a small hill with a door and 2 tiny windows. Inside, the cabin felt different. The walls extended 4 feet below ground, creating a sense of being embraced by the earth. He built a small stove in the corner, barely large enough to heat a tent. Silas Thorne rode by in late September and laughed. "That toy wouldn't warm a doghouse. You planning to burn it 24 hours a day?" "I'm planning to let the earth do most of the work," Lars said. "The earth." Silas shook his head. "The earth freezes, Bergen. It's not your friend." Silas peered through the doorway at the sunken interior. "Looks like a tomb. Feels like home. It'll feel like death by January." Silas turned his horse. "I've got cattle to worry about." I can't be checking on every fool who thinks he knows better than men who've lived here for decades. Lars watched him ride away. The first frost had already silvered the grass. By November, Lars's sunken cabin had become the territory's favorite cautionary tale. Trappers passing through Juneau detoured miles just to see the Norwegian's grave. Miller made a special trip in early November with 2 younger trappers to show them what happened when a man ignored wisdom. That earth is going to freeze solid in about 6 weeks. Then the cold's going to come up through those stones like water through a sieve. At the Mercantile, the betting pool grew to $23. Silas reported. With piles barely grown since September, maybe 2 cords total. I've got 9 stacked, and I'm still cutting. Either the man plans to freeze, or he's lost his mind. The first hard freeze came on November 19th. Temperature dropped to -8 degrees overnight. Silas rode past Lars's property at dawn and saw no smoke from the tiny chimney. He waited an hour, certain Lars had frozen. Then the door opened. Lars emerged in his shirt sleeves, no coat, no hat, carrying a bucket. He nodded at Silas. Morning. Silas stared. Your fire's out. I let it die around midnight. Don't need it until evening. It's 8 below zero. Outside, yes, Lars smiled. Inside, my floor is 50 degrees. The earth doesn't care what the air is doing. Silas muttered about cattle and rode away, refusing to enter the cabin. The winter of 1886 didn't arrive. It attacked. Historians call it the most devastating winter in the history of the North. The first blizzard struck on January 9th. Temperatures dropped 40 degrees in 6 hours to -15 degrees. The storm lasted 3 days, followed by a second, third, and fourth. On January 28th, the temperature dropped to -53 degrees. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes. Silas Thorne's ranch became a slaughterhouse. He lost over 400 cattle. But the cattle weren't the only concern. His cabin, built with a proper raised floor, had become a freezing coffin. The air gap beneath Silas's floor had dropped to -50 degrees. The gap wasn't insulation. It was a reservoir of killing cold radiating upward. No matter how much wood he burned, his children slept in boots, huddled around a red-hot stove. His wife developed frostbite on her toes inside the cabin. Water froze in buckets, set 3 feet from the fire. Miller's cabin fared no better. The legendary trapper found himself burning furniture by February 1st. 3 settlers in the valley died that winter. A young couple was found in their beds, frozen solid in a cabin built to exact specifications, with a raised floor and a proper air gap. The air gap had killed them. At Lars Bergen's sunken cabin, January passed like a manageable dream. His stone floor held steady at 48 degrees throughout the worst of the blizzards. The earth 4 feet below grade didn't care about the record-shattering storms. It simply held its heat. Lars's small stove burned a modest fire each morning. His wood pile, the pathetic 2 cords, remained more than adequate, while Silas burned 9 cords and ran out, and Miller burned his furniture. Lars used 15 pounds of wood per day and kept his cabin above 45 degrees. On February 3rd, Silas appeared at Lars's door, frostbitten and desperate, his pride finally broken. I need to understand, Silas said through cracked lips. Lars brought him inside. The rancher stopped, his face registering confusion as warmth enveloped him from below. Below the floor, Silas whispered, It's warm. Not warm, but not frozen. Feel it yourself. Silas lowered himself and pressed his hand against the stone. His eyes widened. It was 50 degrees, warmer than his own floor had been in 2 months. The surface is frozen, Lars explained, but 4 foot down nothing changes. He showed Silas's logs. 15 pounds wood a day. Silas had burned 9 cords and nearly died. The myth killed them, Silas said quietly, thinking of neighbors who had frozen. They built exactly like Miller said. Raised floors, stone piers, everything right. Everything wrong, Lars replied. A raised floor works in a mild winter to keep dampness away, but in a killing winter, that air gap is a liability. You're fighting the cold from below and above at the same time. Silas wrapped his damaged hands around a warm cup of coffee. I want to learn, he finally said. My brother is coming out in the spring. He'll need a place. Lars nodded. Bring him here when the ground thaws. I'll show him how to dig.